everybody. I'm Erin Mark. I'm the Director of New Business at Merit, and I'm here with Keli Jacobi, an extremely talented higher ed consultant. So Keli and I actually used to work together when she was at UALR and used Merit, which is how we know each other. And she was hands down one of my favorite clients. I'm not just saying that because I'm here with her. It's very true. Keli recently wrote an incredibly insightful white paper titled Generation Z and Parental Influence. So you can actually click the link in the description below to download it, or head over to our website, meritpages.com, for download. But in addition, I just thought it would be fun to hop on for a quick chat with Keli to talk about a few of the aspects of her white paper that really stood out to me and have her share some of her expertise. So before we get to that, Keli, why don't you just give everybody an overview of your experience with higher ed?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Erin, and thank you for your kind words. Ditto back to you. So I have been involved in some way, shape, or form with higher ed marketing and or communications since before the Great Recession, which was our last big milestone in higher ed. That was a tough time too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, more than a decade or so. Before that, I even covered higher education as my beat. I was a reporter for medium-sized Northeast Louisiana paper. And I make the joke that higher ed made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I went to the so-called dark side of public relations first and basically just continued to write, but wrote from the perspective of that organization and found myself just falling in love with it. I thought that it was going to be boring. Higher ed is not boring at all. And there are probably some people out there watching this that are just like, yeah, right. No, it's not boring. So yeah, kind of just slowly worked my way up from there through the ranks. Eventually, setting aside the PR angle, and my focus became more the marketing side of things. And ultimately, I wound up being a director of marketing and communications for a small liberal arts college in Northeast Arkansas, which was also another great growing experience. And now, more recently, I am a consultant, as you said, and using all those years of experience and some of my education to continue to help contribute to this important field.
Great. And this project actually came about because I've been hearing a lot of feedback from the higher ed institutions I work with at Merit, how parental engagement has become a really important initiative and
Mhm.
strategy. And
Yes.
right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say yes. In fact, where I was at last, we were working on a parent piece, but yeah, we'll get to some more of that later. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And we're one of the only platforms actually that specifically distributes to parents and really gives them a way to share their sons or daughters' achievements across social media. So we just thought it would be helpful for our clients to have a white paper created by an expert like Keli, and to just really highlight the digital intersection of Gen Z and that parental influence. And also, I love how you kind of opened with how social media too has emerged as a prime source of information for students trying to learn about a school. Makes sense, right? Especially like in today's
Absolutely.
world.
Yeah.
And the
This is
family. Go ahead.
this is the digital generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
So let me start with kind of the first thing that stuck out to me that I thought was really eye-opening and made me feel old also, when you said that those born after
Don't talk about
1997.
old to me.
I said it, I was like, oh my gosh, Kelly, are the only ones with no memory of the world as it existed before smartphones. And I was like, yes. Do you remember? I had one of those, you know, those like firebox, like phones like that, like lit up when it rang. I don't know if you had that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I do remember that.
I was so excited to get one for Christmas, and it was like in my room for the first time. It was just like really exciting for me. I just like went back to that, and then like star 6 7, those kind of funny things, or call waiting. It brought back a lot of memories. Just that one like note that you
Yeah. How far we have come.
exactly. And then you went on to kind of say that 95% of Gen Zs report having smartphone access, and 45% report being online constantly.
Yes.
Very true. I can see how that could
Yes.
be.
Mhm.
And then just really how the generation diverges from its older millennial counterparts in that, its members are more likely to post accomplishments rather than personal problems. And additionally, that, consumption patterns of Gen Z are manifested slightly differently than older generations. So I was wondering if you can kind of elaborate a little more on that.
Yeah, sure. So, before I answer that, let's just stipulate that we're going with what Pew Research defines as Gen Z, and it's pretty broadly accepted by others that this is anybody born 1997 or later. So, we're talking about 24 years old or younger. Anything a little bit above that's going to be a young millennial, right? And let's also just stipulate that, as with any generation, these are generalities. Of course, we're painting with a broad stroke, so this does not mean that every single member is going to reflect all of this to a full degree. So we're just going to say, as true with any generation,
Right.
right? Um, but here's the thing: a few years ago, Pew Research conducted a study on teens' social media habits, and they found the teens were reporting that they posted on a range of topics on social media, but accomplishments played a statistically significant role. Anecdotally, I've seen this too in my nieces and in my younger children. So while millennials may have rightly or wrongly been labeled the selfie generation by some, Gen Z is sort of eschewing that, setting that aside, and they're not so much concerned with posting selfies, but posting what they're achieving. They're very uh, career and outcome focused, according to research, and especially compared to previous generations. In fact, a recent survey showed like 43% reported that personal achievement was central to their identity. So it stands to reason that schools will want to highlight and help promote those achievements in a way that's authentic, that they can let that student share, and then let that kind of be a snowball effect where the student's family and friends start to share those achievements, and incidentally get your brand out there. So yeah, it's been a bit of a change from the millennial generation on that regard. Now, as opposed the whole consumption thing too. Now that was picked up a little bit from the younger millennials, but it's definitely showing no sign of slowing with Gen Z.
Mm.
This is a generation that's super comfortable opening that phone, that smartphone, and calling Uber, calling Lyft, or making reservations with VRBO or Airbnb, some of those sharing apps, as we call them. And they've really boosted this notion of a sharing economy. So this is a complete cultural shift, right, from the old days. And schools, and not just schools, marketers everywhere in big corporations too, are really having to kind of do a reset and think about how they strategically can capitalize on this notion and highlight. There's the old thing about this generation seeks memories, not material. They're not as concerned with accumulating things. They're concerned about having a good life experience. So how can we think about that and highlight the experiences they can have, with this caveat: if that experience comes at too high of a price, they may pause and step back, right? Because that's the whole point of the sharing economy. It's getting these experiences, but getting them at a price point that's manageable for this young generation.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so true. And how like living their lives online, you said, is almost like the same as living their lives on the outside world. It's kind
Right.
of all in one.
Mhm.
And kind of almost going forward still with that, you also mentioned that Gen Zs can tell when they're being marketed to. So I thought that was really interesting because I'm curious of how you think you can kind of strike the balance of pushing your brand and your message out there without overtly making a sales pitch to somebody, especially, if your job is to market to that particular cohort?
That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? I would be
In
super.
Hawaii, maybe if you knew the exact answer on vacation, but not like we were talking about.
I would be a multimillionaire if I knew the exact answer. Um, but look, if 2020 holds any lessons at all for CMOs, it's that this old promotional model where marketing and enrollment are only concerned with pushing out the brand. Now is definitely the time to kind of gently set that aside and consider some other ways, because it's not going to work. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the bottom line. Ask yourself, how well is it working? It's probably not with this generation. Now, quickly, but before I go on and elaborate with that, to be fair, there is some feedback from Gen Zers stating that they do not mind targeted ads based on any data that's gleaned from their um, social media use or internet searches, as long as it is not, this is a quote, not obnoxious.
Okay.
Now, I
Noted.
think, so the challenge is, well, define obnoxious, and to my mind, I think that comes in the form of, first of all, is it really relevant? It's such a fine art and science, right? Doing those targeted ads to that specific person. You want to be sure not to serve up something that's just like, okay, this is annoying me because it doesn't apply to me. I don't care what my search said. Also, is it timely? But is it also not so much as to almost now turn me off? Because it's like, stop, I get it. I saw it the first 50 times you serve the ad up.
Right.
Um, so it is a fine line, isn't it? It's a dance, and I don't profess to have all the answer. But that said, the fact is, long before a student is probably on your radar, you can almost bet that student might have you and have your school and your brand on his or her radar. Because students today are going around the typical branding channels, especially in the middle of a pandemic when we're all stuck at home on our laptops. And they're learning about your campus through sources they judge to be even more authentic than whatever you're pushing out there. They're going to, whether it's browsing Reddit or making note of current student posts on social media platforms as it relates to your campus, you can bet potential students are noticing and watching that kind of stuff. So the best advice I would have is that, chief marketing officers need to feel 110% on top of what their brand values are, because they will surface and they will reflect back to you in one form or another. I think it was Jeff Bezos that said, branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Ooh.
And CMOs really need to embrace that. Success is going to come if leaders recognize the marketing department doesn't create the brand, right? Their job is to reflect the brand as it's understood, as it's adopted internally and externally. And on the road to authenticity, you can ask some questions, like starting with, do we really have a brand vision? Is it written down, or is it just kind of this vague notion? Has it been vetted recently? Maybe it's time for a refresh. Has it been shared widely? I mean, with everyone from um, the chemistry department to the HR folks, so that when employees are onboarded, do they even know what your vision of your brand is? And when you're capitalizing on those differentiators, do you share them in a way that's truly authentic, so that your supporters, your alumni, current students, parents, let them become the best ambassadors, and then your push has become more of a gentle nudge that's intermingled in that mix.
I love that. It's almost, it goes back to like the word of mouth advertising, right? That's always been there. Would I agree?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And then kind of speaking of like, word of mouth too, kind of brings me to my, third thing I was going to ask you about, because the next part of your paper kind of gets into how friends and family recommendations really supersede all other forms of advertising. And a stat that kind of really caught my attention that you noted was that 50% of students report family is the most influential source for education. So, what advice, and you kind of talk about too, would you give higher education communicators, marketers, how to maybe just better connect and engage with that specific group to kind of capitalize on that influence, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And look, the short, quick answer
Mhm.
is I would start by listening.
Mm.
If you're not actively listening and then appropriately responding to what people are already saying about you online, then you've got bigger issues to solve, right? I mean, all of us probably are familiar with that example of a current student that maybe has a parent out there who's maybe raised an objection about a certain school policy,
Mhm.
and the parent feels it's unfair. Parents probably, some are going to post about that objection online. Ack, right? Well, here's the thing, no one from major corporations to the smallest school districts, no one can simply afford to ignore this fact that conversations are happening online that are impacting your brand's reputation. So you need to listen. And this goes both ways. Look, sometimes the things that your parents and others are posting about your brand, about your school, are positive. Capitalize on that. Man, you really need a social media rock star on your staff, and hopefully you do, but really empower that person to respond in a positive way to those positive mentions. Maybe even elevate it to all the way up to your president if you can, and if not your president or chancellor, somebody else in a VP role who maybe takes it a step further and writes a handwritten note to that parent saying,
I
thanks so
love
much.
that.
Thanks so much for that mention. I am telling you, it will go miles away, because how many of us receive those handwritten notes from a person in authority? That I just really, really advocate taking a route like that. But it begins with listening, right? But what we know, bottom line, is that yes, teens and young adults who they listen to largely are their parents. I know it's hard to believe. Not me, not my generation, but not my story. But this is the story of Gen Z. They're listening to it. They don't always act fully on it, but they're listening what their parents say, what their extended family members have to say. Their recommendations are impactful, and research shows us they have an enormous influence on school choice. So, it behooves college marketers to create some targeted marketing collateral aimed at these parents, aimed at, yeah, the parents of Gen Z, which by and large today is Gen X, maybe some older millennials too, sprinkled in there. But Gen X has definitely kind of taken up what used to be filled by boomers. Boomers are now the grandparents, right? So targeted material. One thing generally that we see in research that these parents want to know about is specific career outcomes and earning capabilities 5 years, 10 years down the road. Um, this is a generation, Gen X saw their wealth diminish greatly during the Great Recession. So they took a deeper hit statistically than most of the other generations. And, you just want to bear in mind, it's caused them their shift in focus to kind of move over a little bit from um, what am I going to get for all this investment
Right. Yeah.
in education? And like Gen Z, I'll say that 15 times,
I know.
uh, like their younger students, Gen X is skeptical about obvious forms of advertising. So they also want that authentic contact. And they do prefer things specifically targeted to them, not that generic thing that anybody could pick up, but speaks to their specific concerns. That said, if a brand earns their trust, Gen X is loyal to a fault. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. And, talking about what the earnings are and, the opportunities. I've been talking a lot to my clients about promoting the success of their alumni and feeding that
Yes.
back in, right? Because you can kind of see, okay, great. You can see almost a career path or pathway to the
Yes.
success of those students because everybody's going to college for a job. Obviously you're going for the experience as well. I want to include it for part, of course.
Of
But
course.
at the end of the day, it's a lot of money to pay for just an experience. Like I better get something out of this for my degree
That's right.
in the future, right? Or
Right.
even connections, I feel like it's all about who you know too, a lot of times these days. So the connections to the university and those opportunities to try to tell those stories too, for both the, millennials and Gen Zs can also be really helpful, I think.
Yes. Totally agree.
Yeah. So the other thing before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one more thing. So, from my experience working, with higher ed like you, metrics and data are extremely important for measuring marketing and communication efforts to hit targeted goals. So, in your piece, you pointed out that metrics aren't the same as data, which I thought was really interesting. And understanding the difference should just be a basic requirement for every member of the college marketing team. So, can you just talk a little more about that?
I would love to.
Yeah.
This this topic is near and dear to
I
my
saved the best for last. That's why.
and it just really speaks to the heart of what I always hoped to be, which was a data informed CMO, because it helps you decide where to allocate what is often limited resources. That's the reality
Mhm.
that most people in higher ed are facing. Um, but here's what we know: a successful organization can only measure so many things well. And what it measures ties to how it defines success. So it's important that you know a metric is basically what are you choosing to measure. A metric contains a single type of data. For example, video views. The data is the number of video views. It's a quantifiable number, right? The
Mhm.
metric is that we choose to measure that or not. We're going to not measure that. We're going to measure this data over here. You
Yeah.
can't change your data. You either got 50 views or a million views or somewhere in between or none at all. The data is the data. It speaks for itself. You can't choose it, but you can choose the metrics, the measurements that your team decides, and you're maybe in conjunction with your leadership decides are the most important things. So the best way I know to explore the difference between data and metrics is through a scenario. And that's, let's just say your college advancement team has posted a video on YouTube, received a million hits on Giving Tuesday. A
Mhm.
million, a million hits, right? That's phenomenal. But what if it only resulted in 8 donations that averaged $5? I'm not poo-pooing any amount of money,
Right. Right.
obviously, but depending on which metrics your team agreed mattered the most, you could say the video was a resounding success, a million views, or you could say, well, shoot, we need to reevaluate because we made $40 as a result of our time and effort. Where did we not quite hit the mark? What can we do better?
Yeah.
Because in that case, the assumption would be that donations was the top metric you wanted to measure as a definition of success. Not that we're discounting the million views, because that would be a secondary important thing because it does get your brand out there. Eyeballs are on you at least. And who knows who those people might be influencing or sharing it with. So,
Right.
clearly that's also a great way to measure your success. But we just need to be very holistic and very discerning, in my opinion. Still more appropriate measures might be return on marketing investment. In other words, for the time and effort that we devoted to this project, how was our return on that money, time, and energy spent? Because everything we say yes to over here, we're going to have to say no to something over here that
Yeah.
might be equally or more important, um, and might be closer to achieving the outcomes that we say we want to watch. So those are just kind of my top level thoughts on that matter.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It makes so much sense. And I know there's so much more great information that you put in your white paper. And We are just so thankful to partner with you. We really look forward to partnering with you again in the future. Our clients have found your white paper as a huge resource. So I know other higher ed marketing and communications folks who download it and watch this will as well. So thanks so much again, Kelly. It was so nice
Thank
talking
you.
to you.
It's so great talking to you, too, Era. And I don't know if you're as cold as I am down here in Arkansas, but stay warm.
We are very cold here in New York. It is, I'm looking out my window now and it is snowing, so I'm ready for a vacation. So if anybody wants to send Kelly and I on a COVID-free vacation somewhere, we'll quarantine and go. We're good.
I love it. I love it. I'm
Have a
packing.
great day,
I'm
Kelly.
packing now. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.